Show here, and today I'm going to show you how to repair a leaky distributor on a 97 Honda Accord. The distributor usually has two types of leaks. You have internal leaks and external leaks. That's what's known as an external leak. You can see the oily film here. In here you have an O-ring which prevents external leaks. Back here you have a shaft seal which prevents internal leaks. The distributor cap has a drilled hole at the bottom to allow oil from an internal leak to be seen. And it also prevents the distributor from filling up with oil, which would cause you lots of problems.
Now, since distributor removal is required for both the external O-ring and the internal shaft seal, I recommend you replace both, regardless of whether or not they're leaking, because you'll have a distributor out, and it's cheap insurance that you won't have to do this job twice.
After I remove the cap and look inside, if there's oil in there, if there's a film of oil in there, I know it's also leaking internally.
Now, if a distributor's leaking internally, there should be evidence of oil seeping out of the drain hole at the bottom of the cap, and there should also be a trail of oil inside the cap when you remove it and look inside. The Hitachi distributor with the internal coil, not covered in this video, has the oil drain passage on the distributor housing and not on the cap itself.
Okay, we're just going to remove the 3 screws holding the cap on. One here, and one back there. You could use a Phillips screwdriver or an 8mm socket. Some distributor caps will have captive screws where when you loosen them, the screws won't come out. They'll come out of the threaded portion of the distributor, but they won't come out of the cap themselves. This is an aftermarket, so they're not. So they just pull right out.
If you do have internal leakage in your distributor and you need to clean your cap up, we'll deal with that after we remove the distributor.
Pull the cap off, just put it aside. In order to remove this dust cover here, first you have to remove the rotor. The rotor has one screw, one Phillips screw. Now that rotor screw I was talking about is not positioned where I can get at it. It's right over here. See it right there?
You want it so the back end of the rotor is facing up through that cutout in the dust cap.
Easiest way to do that, 19mm socket on the power steering pump and just turn it. And that'll turn the distributor rotor.
You can remove the rotor after getting the distributor out, but I like to do it now. That way when you're loosening the screw, you don't have to worry about the shaft rotating on you. Another way to turn the shaft to get it lined up is disconnect the connectors from the distributor and just bump the starter to get the rotor into a more favorable position.
There we go. There it is. Occasionally you may get lucky and it may be in a position where you can get at it. Other times you might not be. It's going to stick the screwdriver in there and remove that screw. Don't lose the screw. Just wiggle it. There it goes. Now you can pull the plastic shroud off. Before we continue, you need to determine if you have an OBD1 or OBD2 vehicle. Vehicles made 1995 and back are OBD1. Vehicles made 1996 and onward are OBD2. And here's a way to check visually whether you have one or the other. Look under the steering column. If this were an OBD2 vehicle, there'd be a sticker saying the connector is behind the ashtray. So if I go remove the ashtray, look back there, you have an empty slot. That's where your OBD2 connector would be if this were an OBD2 vehicle. This vehicle, on the other hand, is different. It's an OBD2 vehicle. If I look under the column, there's the sticker. Serial data link connector for OBD2 is located on the center console behind ashtray. So if I go over there, take out the ashtray, and there is your OBD2 connector where you'd plug in your scan tool. Now, for the reason any of this matters. If you have an OBD1 vehicle, you have to mark the distributor's position relative to the cylinder head in order to preserve the timing. Otherwise, you'll need a timing light when you reinstall it. If you have an OBD2 vehicle, the timing can't be adjusted by rotating the distributor, so you won't need to perform this next step. Alright, before we continue, we have to mark the distributor's location so we can restore the timing when we put the distributor back on. Just gonna clean up right here. Just going to mark the relative position of the distributor to the cylinder head. You could use whiteout or touch-up paint or whatever you want, or you could just scribe a line with a chisel, whatever you got to do. That'll help me put it back in time. If you don't do this, you're going to need a timing light in order to retime the engine. There we go. Alright, let's pop the distributor out. 3 12mm bolts. 1, 2, and 1 down there. Now that we've marked the distributor's relation to the cylinder head, we don't have to worry about timing anymore. There is quite a pool of crud down there. Pull out the 2 connectors. Just tap here. Squeeze and pull. Just tap here. Squeeze and pull again. Okay. Just get the distributor. Pull it straight out.
After taking the distributor off, check the heater core inlet hose for any damage. This is a textbook example of what long-term oil exposure does to a hose. It breaks down the rubber. As you can see here, the hose is actually blowing a little bubble. That little raised section of hose could easily burst and leave you stranded on the side of the road with a coolant leak. So if your distributor is leaking oil, don't put it off, because it can easily destroy this hose if it goes on long enough.
Gonna get a can of brake clean and a shop rag, spray it down. Clean as much of the oil sludge off as I can. Before I do that, I'm just going to take my rag and plug the hole here. Just going to spray it down, wipe it off. Now, the reason I'm using this over engine degreaser or any other compound like that is because if you read the label on most engine degreasers, after you spray it on and wipe the grease off, they recommend that you fully wash down the engine with water. Brake clean is 0 residue, so it evaporates very rapidly.
Just spray it on and wipe it off until a majority of the oil residue is gone. Make sure to wear your safety glasses because the brake clean does come out at a high enough pressure where it could splash back at you. The last thing you want is brake clean in your eyes.
That's nice and clean. I also put a little bit of brake clean on a rag, and I'm just going to clean out where the seal rides because there may be grit and grime that could cause it to not seat properly. Going back and forth over it a few times, got a nice clean surface for the new O-ring to mate against so we don't have any leaks. Now there's a little bit of oil on here, so I'm just going to get a rag, a little bit of brake clean, just wipe it down, get that oil slime off there. Now you could do the same thing with the inside of the cap here. If there was oil in there and it's still in good shape, that means you look at the contacts here, they're not pitted, they're not rusted. If they are, then by all means replace the cap. Just put a little brake clean on a rag and you could clean it out like this. One thing I have to caution you of is obviously brake clean is flammable. So electricity and brake clean equals fire. So just make sure after you clean it, just set the cap aside and don't put it back on the vehicle for a while so the brake clean can evaporate. It evaporates pretty quickly.
I'll be replacing this cap with a Honda cap later. If the oil leaking from the distributor destroyed the heater hose, as it did here, check the description. I put a link to another video that'll show you how to replace that.
Here's the distributor. Cleaned it up with a bit of brake clean. Here are the parts. Outer distributor O-ring. Inner shaft seal. Now this wasn't purchased from Honda. I had to purchase this from partstrain.com, I believe.
This is an OEM replacement part. It's made by NOK and OK. You cannot purchase it at your dealer, but you can purchase it online. Just pop the part number into Google and you'll find many sellers selling it. This seal is only compatible with the tech distributors. They're identified by their external coil. It's not compatible with the Hitachi distributors with an internal coil or any V6 distributor.
Now the first thing we have to do to remove the inner seals, we have to get this piece on the shaft off. Now it's retained by a snap ring right there, and then there's a pin that just loosely fits between the snap ring. Now before we take this out, we have to mark its relationship to the shaft. So you want to go to the shaft right here and then just smack a dimple. One dimple here, one dimple here. Because as you can see, this is offset. So you can't put the distributor in 180 degrees out, but you can put this on 180 degrees out.
In other words, if you get the orientation of this piece wrong, the distributor will mesh up with the camshaft just fine. However, it'll be 180 degrees out, so the vehicle won't start.
Got my steel center punch here and just punch some alignment marks. And just punch another one. See, got some nice alignment marks, so I make sure I put that right back on the way it came off. So here's the end of the snap ring right here, and then there's a pin held captive by this snap ring. Just find the end of the snap ring, stick its tiny screwdriver in the groove here, just pry it out of its track. Insert it in the little gap here, pry it up and just work it off. There it goes. Keep a tight grip on it so it doesn't shoot off on you. There it is. There's a pin that's loosely in there. I'm just going to push it out with my punch. It's not interference fit or anything, it's just held by that snap ring, just pushes right out. You can just pull the end of the shaft right off. Very important. There are two spacer shims on the back of this thing, don't lose them. And make sure you put them back when you reinstall the end piece. Now we're ready to start tearing this thing down to get to the inner seal. First thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen these 3 screws. 1, 2, 3. I accidentally left the gasket for the distributor cap on here. Distributor gasket. Now to remove it, go to the rear here and just push the shaft out, and the whole assembly here will just come out. Okay, push. Make sure you get this rubber grommet here out, this connector grommet. Continue pulling out very slowly. Alright. And I'm just going to let this hang on the side here. Now I'm just going to remove the position sensor right here. It's held in by 2 screws. 1, 2. Get that out. Okay. Now we're just going to release these 2 connectors off the metal plate here. I'm going to squeeze these tabs back here, squeeze. Just pull this off the bracket. You depress this one, you pull back on this one. Okay, now we can get this whole assembly out of here. This is your igniter right here. This is your cylinder position sensor. And this is just the harness. This is the back here retained by these 3 screws. This is the bearing.
Now would be a good time to check your distributor bearing. It should spin freely without making excessive noise and should stop shortly after. If the bearing's bad, I'd highly recommend you get a Honda distributor. There are plenty of places where you can go aftermarket on Hondas, but the ignition system isn't one of them.
I'll just put this aside. And this is the bare distributor, and right in there is our seal that we want to get at. Right there, that's the shaft seal. Best way I found to get it out is just get a nice flathead screwdriver. Get under the lip of the seal from the other side at an angle like this, and just wrap on it.
That shaft seal could sometimes be stubborn, but just keep at it. Eventually it'll pop out.
I completely destroyed the thing, look at that. The garter spring that keeps the seal taut against the shaft fell out. Just got a screwdriver and just kept tapping on it with the palm of my hand from the back, and eventually it came out.
That's the distributor after shaft seal removal. It's got a bit of residue in the bore there. Just going to get a bit of brake clean on a rag and clean that off.
Now to prepare the seal for installation, I sprayed just a little bit of silicone around the edge of the seal. I'm just going to put it in the bore here nice and straight as I can. Make sure it's driven in the whole way. I did start it up by hand. I'm just going to, I think this is what, a 9/16 socket. To make sure that it's fully seated. That's seated. It's all the way down. It's all the way in. It's flush. We're ready to go. Okay, now I saved the easiest for last. Here's your outer seal. Just get your pick tool. Have to get under it and probably crack it off. There it is. Just split it open with the tool. This isn't rubber anymore, look at this. Snap like plastic. This rubber O-ring is shot. Get the new O-ring, just roll it right on there. That's it. External leak solved. Get the position sensor right here. It's got an alignment pin here, so it can only go in one position. Get this grommet. We're going to get the grommet here and just put it where it has to be. Drop the position sensor into the housing. Sealing grommets in place. Now we're going to refasten the position sensor right here.
The surface of the cylinder position sensor is magnetic, so if there are any metal filings on it, be sure to brush them off before installing the sensor.
I hit the alignment pin right there. The alignment pin is in, so it's locked where it has to be. We're just going to put the 2 screws back in. These 2 stubby screws.
Just put in each screw loosely, and after both are in and everything's aligned properly, just snug them up.
Now, before we drop the shaft back through the new oil seal, we're going to take a bit of engine oil. I'm just going to put it inside the seal. That'll help the shaft slip on through. Just going to clean up any excess on the outside because you don't want oil in here. Okay. Now we're just going to take the shaft, just pivot it back in. Make sure you insert it as straight as possible. Actually, I'm going to pull that little grommet out because I need a little bit more wiggle room. Just insert it. I'm just gently rotating the shaft back and forth as I put it in. And there it is. Now the plate will snap down in place, line up the screw holes. I'll pop my little rubber grommet back in again. There we go. Now put in the 3 screws. Just putting them all in loosely, and I'll finally tighten them after they're all in. I'm just going to clip our little cables here back in. Snapped in and ready. And the final step, let's reinstall our end piece here. Put the 2 spacers. Put the piece back in. There's my punched mark. Punched another mark on the shaft. Line the 2. Put in the little pin. It goes in loosely. You just push it in with finger pressure. Don't forget the retaining clip here, otherwise that pin will fall out. Just put it in the groove right here. Just work it down slowly. Well, eventually, there it is. And that holds the pin in so it doesn't come out on you. Now you can see my match marks. 1 punch here, 1 punch there. That's exactly where it needs to be. I'm not going to have problems with the distributor being 180 degrees out. Good to go.
Before we put the distributor back on, get a bit of clean engine oil and make sure to lube up that outer O-ring.
Now, I made a line here, I have a line here, so this ear is pointing up. The connector should be facing downward towards the back. Just gonna bring it in place. Rotate the shaft until it mates with the camshaft. You can feel it, locks in place. I'll line it with my line I put on there for timing. Now I'm going to reinstall the bolts. Put in the last bolt, which you can't see, right down here in the back. Gonna snug them up. Don't need to kill them. Snug them up. Again, I already made sure that my timing line was lined up. Your dust cap back on. Got a brand new rotor from Honda. Again, recommend Honda distributor caps and rotors. The shaft on the end of the distributor is in a D shape, so is the rotor, so it only goes on one way.
One thing you won't get with a new rotor is a new screw, so don't lose it.
Since I turned the engine over to get the old rotor off while it was on the vehicle, the screw is pointing directly up where I need it to be. Just take the rotor, put it on, just push it down until it bottoms out. Yep. Let's put that screw back in. Some distributor rotors are just pressed on. You just push them on and pull them off, but Honda didn't use that design on these vehicles. This is the distributor cap I'm putting on. OE Honda, made by Tech, who made the distributor. Comes with a new gasket. Be sure to put this on. Take the gasket, put it around the groove here. Okay. Make sure that gasket stays in place and it doesn't pop off. If you see it oozing out of the side anymore, don't tighten the screws and just reposition the gasket where it needs to be. Again, just tighten it till it's snug. Don't over tighten it. We're dealing with plastic again. And get that last third screw underneath here with an extension. Okay. You got the high voltage from the external coil. And these are just for the individual cylinders. Put it in the same orientation. Just get to it. Don't forget your connectors on the back of your distributor. Clip the high voltage lead to the external coil right under here.
That's all there is to it. You just saved yourself at least $180 for a new distributor.